And in fact, in their ideology, they had respect for both Satan and Jesus. I mean, they spoke publicly on this all over the world. And they said that the final awakening of mankind is when Jesus and the devil fuse together in some sort of hieros gamos. This was a very short description of what they believed. And these characters, these strange people's champions who radiate this kind of charm or persona, or have natural gifts or special talents, who represent the spirit of the age, or whatever you want to call it, men and women of exceptional talent, beauty, charm, you see. Through these people, you work your sorcery. Most of the time, the person who's being used hasn't the faintest idea what's going on. But they are being used like pieces on a chessboard. They are puppets on a string. This book by Alana Nash is very interesting to show you the truth about the Colonel. The Colonel Sam, who was Colonel Tom Parker, who was controlled Elvis from the time he was a very young man. Some interesting facts there. But again, we can see this iconic semi-pseudo-religious symbolism around people like Jim Morrison, even Kurt Cobain. They have one other interesting thing in common, by the way. We can see it in a more darker version, because these groups that I'm talking about have their agents everywhere, and they're happy to tell you through their symbolism. I got questions about people like this, Robert Mapplethorpe, and even many of the people that make movies. I mean, this is slowly coming out more and more. Just like 10 years ago, when people like me spoke on symbolism, they said, "You're crazy." Now it's accepted. Well, I hope that in 5 years from now, this kind of evidence also comes out to the point where it's no longer a matter of conjecture or supposition. But this cult, as I said, reveals itself through the symbolism that it employs. Sometimes that's very specific symbolism, sometimes it's more general. And also the agents that it employs. That symbolism will be partly Masonic, partly Hermetic, partly Satanic, straight out Satanic. And the group that I'm talking about, they shun the limelight. They have to keep a very straight veneer. But they do have a penchant also for sacrifice, for getting rid of those people who stand in their way. If we look at the symbolism they use on certain album covers, like Goat's Head Soup by the Rolling Stones, you'll find some interesting symbolism, certainly on their Satanic Majesty's Request. Satanic Majesty's Request, is that a reference to the Queen of England? And on Tattoo You, and also on Bridges to Babylon. These are album covers that are worth a objective study. Bridges to Babylon poster here showing the Tower of Babel. A curious symbolism there. Now, in regards to this whole drug cult scene in Los Angeles, Maury Terry says the Los Angeles drug scene in 1969 could be likened to a field of pyramids, which roughly divided the marketplace into various specialized segments. Near the top of one pyramid, the chemical dope edifice, was a man said to have been a former Israeli who had strong links to the international intelligence community. He says that the Westchester cult was spawned back in the early 1950s. Westchester cult is the Son of Sam group who did those murders. Okay, so the Westchester cult was spawned back in the early 1950s, courtesy of a Nazi sympathizing doctor who traveled from England to Yonkers in the post-war years. It started as a ritual magic club that specialized in sex with children and drug dealing, and it grew from there. It was well organized, and they had some big connections in Yonkers and Manhattan. And this was what Maury Terry was told by an insider, by a member of that cult. And again, he's trying to hint there that there's a British connection. The British and European royals, the British and the European elites. And according to this informant, by the way, he says it's still going on. There's still these cults are meeting right now in Yonkers and in Untermeyer Park. Nothing has necessarily changed. But we spoke earlier about the movie Betrayers and how these cults make use of charitable fronts, philanthropic organizations, and one of the examples is the power that the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry has over hospitals. And you'll see this word Rite, R-I-T-E, in America. Rite Aid is a pharmaceutical outlet. Clearly Masonic, openly Masonic. And when I say Masons, though, I'm talking about very high degree Masons. For those who don't know, they should check out this particular group, the Shriners. They're some of the highest degree Masons in the world, and they are very much involved in so-called child protection, child charity. And this is a very sinister group, by the way. And it's not by accident that they're using Islamic symbolism here, because that ties into a group called the Frankists, a group called the Seveners, the Ishmaelis, and many of these other Oriental versions of Freemasonry, which most of us have not a clue about. And it's interesting also why they happen to be using the face of Akhenaten. Those who've been following my work on the Irish origins of civilization will understand exactly why that symbol is used. But again, you don't really have to go that deep if you don't want to. Just look at the symbolism and you'll see what's being told. Symbols of the sun and so on. And of course it goes slightly up the fractal a bit, because even on a larger level, the larger pharmaceutical organizations are controlled by these same people, these Oppenheimers and Bayers and Rothschilds. They're the same names, you see, that turn up over and over again when you're dealing with this world network, this world criminal syndicate. Behind everything depraved, you find the same dragon symbolism. And why they even use the color blue. Blue degrees of Freemasonry and so on. And if you study these groups, it's very important to look at their origins, obviously, and also to look at who they're affiliated with, who sits on their boards. For instance, did you know that on the Red Cross, which is a patently obvious allusion, by the way, to the Knights Templar, the head of that, or sitting on the top board of that, is William Casey. Mr. Charity himself, yeah? Not only a member of Propaganda Due, he's a Freemason, specifically of the Grand Orient Lodges. He's a Knight of Malta. He belongs to a secret group called the Secret Team, which you can look up on the internet. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which directly ties him into the British establishment, the Round Table Societies. He's a member, he was instrumental in Operation Paperclip, a key mover in Operation Paperclip to bring leading Nazis to America and set them up. He was deeply involved in the Iran-Contra scandal, peddling drugs and guns to the Contras, and he's a leading honcho in the CIA. But his day job is he sits on the board of the Red Cross, so just remember that. And we can't even get into the power of the Red Cross and that whole story of charities and how wars can stop and how the Red Cross are used. These charities are also used for spying, because of course what can they do? They can go between the enemy lines. They operate on both sides of the enemy lines. It's unbelievable. So these groups, Nestle, DuPont, Unilever, you know, all in Merck. It's interesting to find out who sits on these boards. And also, again, the symbolism they use. What does the horse mean? What does the black horse represent? What does the caduceus of Hermes allude to? There's millions of symbols in the world. Why use those symbols? We've got to find out who these medics and Medicis and hospitalers are, and where these words and terms come from. This picture, which was once featured on the David Icke site, and on my colleague Ellis Taylor's, was the first person to feature it, I believe, is the painting that was done by a young girl, Sarah, who was ritually murdered in a ritual murder. And this was drawn while she was enduring this kind of abuse and was being involved in these rituals. Look at the symbolism. You not only have the serpentine symbol up there, she's surrounded by two serpents, and then you have this Masonic checkerboard. That was drawn by a dead girl, a murdered girl, a very young child. And we have the connections and links to these images for people who want more information.